A retired Navy SEAL named Caleb Walker stopped at a winter market in Frostwood, Montana, and saw a German Shepherd tied to a wooden post beneath a cardboard sign. For sale, $1. The dog was thin, shaking, and covered in snow, but when he lifted his wounded head, Caleb's heart nearly broke. It was Titan, his canine partner declared dead 4 years ago after a mission that stole his best friend and shattered his faith. Caleb thought he was buying back a forgotten dog, but the rope around Titan's neck, the scars on his body, and the way he stared toward the old black pine warehouse would uncover a buried betrayal the whole town had been forced to ignore. What happened next shocked everyone. If you believe God can send hope back in the form of a loyal dog, subscribe and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. What city are you watching from? Comment below. Snow had been falling over Frostwood since dawn. It came down soft at first, like ash from a quiet fire, settling over the roofs, the pine branches, the parked trucks along Main Street, and the old wooden booths of the winter market. By noon, the whole Montana Valley looked buried under a white silence that made every sound feel far away. The Frostwood Winter Market stretched along the frozen square beneath strings of yellow bulbs and sagging canvas tents. There were tables of handmade candles, jars of mountain honey, wool scarves, rusted tools, old books, kettle corn, and Christmas wreaths stiff with frost. People moved slowly through the snow with their collars raised and their hands tucked deep in their pockets. Caleb Walker did not come there for company. He came for nails, roofing tar, and a small roll of weatherproof flashing before the storm got worse. At 42, Caleb was still built like a man who had trained his body to survive what most men never saw. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with a strong jaw shadowed by dark stubble, short black hair dusted with snow, and tired gray eyes that seemed to notice every exit, every hand, every sudden movement. He wore a red and black flannel shirt beneath an old dark green military jacket, the fabric faded and scuffed at the elbows. On the left sleeve, half covered in frost, was a worn U.S. Navy SEAL patch. That patch made people look twice. Caleb hated that. Frostwood was a small town tucked between pine slopes and old mining roads, the kind of place where everyone knew which truck belonged to whom, which family had lost a son, which neighbor drank too much, and which newcomer carried a past heavy enough to bend the air around him. Caleb had lived on Black Pine Ridge for almost 7 months, long enough for people to know his name, not long enough for anyone to know him. He walked through the market with his head slightly lowered, one gloved hand holding a canvas supply bag, the other tucked near his coat pocket out of habit. He had the look of a man trying to pass through the world without leaving footprints. A woman selling apple cider smiled at him. He nodded once and kept walking. A pair of teenagers whispered when they saw the seal patch. Caleb pretended not to hear. He had learned a long time ago that questions came in layers. First came the polite ones. Where did you serve? How long were you in? Then came the hungry ones. Did you kill anyone? Did you lose anyone? Were you there when that classified convoy went bad? He had no answers he wanted to give. He stopped at a hardware booth run by a man in a red stocking cap and bought roofing nails, a tarp hook, and a roll of flashing. The man tried to make small talk about the incoming blizzard. Caleb gave short answers, paid in cash, and turned away. That was when he saw the cardboard sign. It was nailed crookedly to a wooden post near the far edge of the market, where the snow had drifted high against the fence and most shoppers had stopped walking. The cardboard was damp and bent, with thick red letters painted across it. For sale, $1. At first, Caleb thought it was a joke. Then he saw the rope. It was wrapped around the post 3 times, stiff with ice, and tied low around the neck of a German shepherd standing beneath the sign. The dog was old, or maybe suffering had made him look old. His coat should have been rich sable and black, the proud coloring of a working dog, but now it hung wet and dirty against his thin frame. Snow clung to his back and ears. His ribs pressed faint lines beneath the fur. One hind leg trembled every few seconds, and when he shifted his weight, he did it carefully, like pain lived in the joints. His left ear was bent halfway down, healed wrong from some injury that had never been treated properly. The dog did not bark. He did not pull at the rope. He simply stood there with his head lowered, eyes half open, snow collecting on his muzzle. Beside him stood Roy Haskins. Roy was a thick, rough-looking man in his late 50s, with a wide belly pushing against a stained brown coat and a face reddened by cold, liquor, or both. His beard was gray and patchy. His lips always seemed to curl before he spoke, and his eyes had the dull, measuring look of someone who priced every living thing by how much trouble it caused him. He owned Haskins Second-Hand and Salvage outside town, a cluttered shop where broken heaters, used tires, dented lockers, and old hunting gear leaned against one another like they were waiting to collapse. People in Frostwood tolerated Roy because he had been there forever. Nobody called him kind. Caleb slowed. Roy saw him looking and grinned. "Need a dog, soldier?" Caleb did not answer. The German shepherd lifted his head. It was a small movement, almost nothing. But the moment those dark eyes found Caleb, something inside the old dog changed. His body went still. His ears twitched. His front paw shifted forward, then stopped, as if hope itself hurt too much to trust. Caleb felt the whole market fall away. The booths disappeared. The cider smell, the snow, the people, the yellow bulbs, the cold, all of it drained into one impossible point. The dog's eyes. Dark, intelligent, broken, familiar. Caleb took one step closer. The shepherd's breathing changed. His chest rose faster. His tail gave one weak movement, then froze. He stared at Caleb with a kind of desperate recognition that reached straight through 4 years of grief and put its hand around Caleb's throat. "No," Caleb whispered. Roy laughed under his breath. "Yeah, he ain't much to look at. Found him years back. Mean old thing. Costs more to feed than he's worth now." Caleb took another step. The dog's head lifted higher. A scar ran along the side of his muzzle, pale beneath the wet fur. Another mark cut across the bridge of his nose. There was a small notch missing from the edge of his right ear. Caleb remembered that notch. A training field outside Coronado. A night exercise. A young German shepherd launching himself too eagerly over a broken fence and catching his ear on wire, then acting offended when Caleb tried to clean the blood. His mouth went dry. The supply bag slipped from his hand and hit the snow. The dog gave a low, trembling sound, not a bark, not a growl. A sound Caleb had heard once in a burning compound overseas, when that same dog had crawled through smoke to find him beneath a collapsed wall. Caleb moved faster now. Roy stepped in front of him, one hand up. "Careful, he bites." Caleb's eyes never left the dog. "What's his name?" Roy shrugged. "Don't have one that matters. I call him Scrap most days." The dog flinched at the word. Caleb's jaw tightened. "What did you call him when you got him?" Roy looked irritated now. His grin faded. "Listen, friend, you want him or not? I'm tired of feeding something that can barely stand." Caleb looked at the rope cutting into the fur around the shepherd's neck. His voice came out low. "Where did you get him?" Roy's eyes narrowed just a little. For half a second, something passed across his face. Not guilt exactly, not fear, more like the annoyance of a man who had been asked the wrong question in public. "Found him behind the old truck stop, half dead. Nobody claimed him, so I took him in." "You chained him." "I kept him from running." "You starved him." Roy's face hardened. "You buyin' or preaching?"
By then, a few people had stopped to watch. A mother pulled her child closer. Two older men near a coffee stand turned their heads. The market seemed to shrink around the post. Caleb reached into his wallet. His fingers were stiff, but not from the cold. He pulled out a single dollar bill, folded once, creased down the middle, and held it out. Roy snatched it.
"There," Roy muttered. "Congratulations. You just bought yourself a dead dog walking." Caleb stepped past him. The German shepherd stared up at him, shaking now. Caleb crouched in the snow. For a moment, he could not move. 4 years ago, the official report had said the dog was dead. Titan, military working dog Titan, assigned to Caleb Walker's unit, lost during a classified extraction mission that ended in fire, screaming metal, and a blast that tore men apart before the dawn even broke. They told Caleb there had been nothing to recover. They gave him a sealed file. They gave him a folded flag for Marcus Hale, his closest friend. They gave him Titan's damaged collar in a plastic evidence bag and said the dog had died with the team. Caleb had believed them because grief had no strength left to argue. But now the dead dog was breathing in front of him. "Titan," Caleb said. The shepherd's ears lifted as much as they could. His eyes widened. Then, with a sound so soft it almost vanished beneath the falling snow, Titan leaned forward and pressed his scarred muzzle into Caleb's hand. Caleb broke. His face twisted before he could stop it. His shoulders dropped. He put one hand against Titan's cheek, then the other, holding that wounded head as if it might disappear if he loosened his grip. "It's you," he whispered. "God help me. It's really you." Titan took one shaky step, then another. The rope snapped tight. Caleb looked down at it, and something cold moved through his expression. He pulled a folding knife from his pocket and sawed through the frozen fibers. The rope fell away from Titan's neck in stiff coils, leaving a raw ring in the fur beneath. The dog stumbled forward. Caleb caught him before he fell. Right there in the middle of Frostwood Winter Market, under the cardboard sign that had priced a war hero at $1, Caleb Walker dropped to both knees and wrapped his arms around the German shepherd he had buried in his heart 4 years before. Titan pressed into him with what little strength he had left. His body shook. Caleb's gloves dug into the wet fur along his ribs. No one laughed now. No one whispered. Even Roy Haskins stood silent, his red face gone tight, the dollar bill crumpled in his fist. Across the market, Grace Miller watched from beside a booth of children's mittens. Grace was 36, slender and pale from long Montana winters, with reddish-brown hair tucked beneath a cream-knit hat and thoughtful blue eyes behind round glasses. She taught 3rd grade at Frostwood Elementary, and she had the gentle patience of someone who spent her days kneeling beside small desks, helping children spell words they were afraid to say out loud. But there was steel beneath that gentleness. Her husband had died in a logging accident 6 years ago, and grief had taught her how to recognize pain when it tried to hide behind silence. She had come to the market for classroom supplies and a few used storybooks. She had not expected to see a man fall apart over a dog, and she had not expected to recognize the dog. Grace's fingers tightened around the paper bag in her arms. For weeks, one of her students, Noah Reed, had been drawing the same animal over and over. A German shepherd with a bent ear, a scarred face, a rope around its neck. Sometimes the dog was behind a fence, sometimes beside a black truck, sometimes standing in front of a dark building with no windows. Grace had thought Noah was drawing fear. Now she wondered if he had been drawing memory. Caleb stood slowly, one arm braced beneath Titan's chest. The dog could barely hold his weight. Roy cleared his throat. "Don't bring him back when he starts dying on your floor." Caleb turned his head. The look he gave Roy was quiet, but it emptied the man's face of color. "I won't." That was all he said.
Caleb lifted Titan as carefully as he could. The shepherd was heavier than he looked, all bone, wet fur, and old muscle, but Caleb carried him like something sacred. Snow gathered on both of them as he walked away from the post, past the staring booths, past the people who suddenly found they had nothing to say. Grace watched him go. Then she looked back at Roy. Roy did not notice her. He had stepped behind the wooden post, half hidden by the falling snow, one hand pressed to a phone at his ear. His voice was low, too low for most people to hear. But Grace had spent 16 years listening to children whisper secrets from the back row of a classroom. She heard enough. "He took the dog," Roy said. "Yeah, the seal. Caleb Walker." Grace went very still. Roy turned his back, shoulders hunched against the snow. "No, I didn't know it would be him," he muttered. "What do you want me to do now?" Grace looked toward the parking lot where Caleb was lowering Titan into the passenger side of an old black pickup truck. The dog's head rested weakly against his arm. The snow thickened between them. For a moment, Grace almost convinced herself to walk away. Then she remembered Noah's drawing. The black truck, the rope, the dog with the bent ear, and the words the boy had written under the picture in small, shaky letters. "He remembers where they hide things." Grace turned back toward Roy Haskins, her heart beating harder now. She did not know what Caleb Walker had just found, but she knew one thing with a certainty that made the cold feel sharper. That dog had not come back from the dead by accident.
The drive back to Black Pine Ridge felt longer than it should have. Snow pressed against the windshield in thick white sheets, erasing the road a few yards at a time. The old black pickup climbed slowly out of Frostwood, past the last row of shops, past the church with its frozen bell tower, past the schoolyard where empty swings moved under the weight of ice. Caleb Walker kept both hands on the wheel, but his eyes kept drifting to the passenger seat. Titan lay there stiffly on an old wool coat, his wet body curled as small as his bones allowed. He did not sleep, not fully. Every few seconds, his dark eyes lifted toward Caleb, as if checking that the man beside him was still real. The dog's breathing was shallow, rough, and careful. Snow melted from his fur and soaked into the coat beneath him. Caleb said nothing for most of the drive. Words felt too small. 4 years ago, he had mourned this dog in silence. He had stood alone outside a military kennel after midnight with Titan's broken collar in his hands, unable to accept that a partner who had once dragged him out of smoke could simply vanish into a line on a report. Killed in action. Body unrecovered. Equipment recovered. Case sealed. Now Titan was beside him, alive, wounded, and trembling every time the truck hit a rut in the frozen road. Caleb tightened his jaw until it hurt. Black Pine Ridge rose behind Frostwood like a dark wall of pine and stone. Caleb's cabin sat near the edge of that ridge, where the county road thinned into gravel, and then into a narrow private lane half buried under snow. It was an old timber cabin with a steep roof, a stone chimney, and windows that looked out toward the woods instead of the town. Caleb had chosen it because no one came there by accident. The cabin was simple, almost bare. 2 rooms downstairs, a loft above, a stone fireplace, a scarred wooden table, a narrow kitchen, and shelves lined with old radio parts, field manuals, and tools. A few military photographs sat face down on the mantel because Caleb had once thought turning them over would make the memories quieter. It had not. He parked close to the porch, killed the engine, and sat there for a second, listening to the soft tick of cooling metal. Titan lifted his head but did not move. "Easy," Caleb said quietly. "I've got you." He stepped out into the snow, walked around the hood, and opened the passenger door. Titan tried to stand on his own. Pride came before strength. His front paws touched the running board, then his bad hind leg buckled. Caleb caught him before he fell. The German shepherd gave a low, embarrassed sound, not quite a whimper. Even broken, even old, Titan still carried the stubborn dignity of a working dog who hated being carried. "I know," Caleb murmured, sliding one arm under his chest and the other beneath his hips. You always hated help. Titan's body was lighter than Caleb remembered. That hurt more than he expected. He carried him up the porch steps and pushed the door open with his shoulder. Cold air followed them inside. The cabin smelled of cedar, ashes, leather, and the faint metallic scent of tools left too long near the fire. Caleb kicked the door shut and moved toward the hearth. Titan lifted his head. His nose twitched. Something changed in him. Caleb felt it before he understood it. The dog's body stopped shaking for one brief moment. His ears shifted forward. His eyes moved across the room slowly, taking in the fireplace, the old leather chair, the table, the dark wool rug in front of the stone hearth. Caleb set him down gently. Titan stood on trembling legs, sniffed once, and walked straight to the rug. Not to the kitchen, not to the door, not to a corner where a frightened dog might hide. He went to the exact spot in front of the fire where he used to sleep during winter training weeks, when Caleb had still been stationed stateside, and Marcus Hale used to joke that Titan had better housing instincts than any man in the unit. Titan turned one slow circle, lowered himself with pain written through every movement, and lay down facing the room, like a sentry, like he had never left. Caleb stood behind him, unable to breathe properly. The cabin suddenly felt full of ghosts. He built the fire with hands that moved from muscle memory. Split cedar first, then pine, then a dry log from the stack beside the hearth. Flames caught slowly, crawling orange along the bark, until warmth began to push back against the cold. Titan watched him. Caleb removed his jacket, but the air seemed to follow him anyway. He pulled a first aid kit from beneath the sink, that a clean towel, scissors, antiseptic, gauze, and an old stainless bowl. When he returned, Titan did not resist. He only lowered his head and let Caleb kneel beside him. That was when Caleb truly saw what had been done. The rope burn around Titan's neck was raw beneath the fur, not fresh enough to be from one day, not old enough to be forgotten. There were scars along the left hind leg, thick and raised, the kind that came from an injury treated late or badly. A burn mark lay near his right hip, hidden beneath matted fur. Several ribs showed when the firelight moved across him. Near his abdomen, Caleb found a crude line of stitches, old but uneven, as if someone without patience or mercy had closed a wound just enough to keep the dog alive. Caleb cleaned the neck first. Titan flinched only once. "Sorry," Caleb whispered. The dog's eyes shifted toward him. No accusation, no fear. Just recognition. That almost broke him again. Caleb worked slowly, cutting away clumps of dirty fur where he had to, cleaning the burn, checking the hind leg, wrapping what needed wrapping. He spoke in short, quiet phrases, because Titan had always responded better to tone than words. "You're safe. Stay with me. Good boy." Then Caleb's fingers found something under the fur near Titan's left shoulder. He stopped. At first, he thought it was scar tissue, a hard knot beneath the skin. But when he parted the fur and pressed lightly, he felt the edge of something small and metallic, flat, round. Not a bullet fragment, not shrapnel, too clean for that. His heart slowed. He moved closer to the firelight. Beneath a thin layer of skin and old scar tissue, something no larger than a dime sat embedded near Titan's shoulder blade. The skin around it had healed badly. Whoever had placed it there had not cared about pain. Whoever had left it there had not expected anyone to look. Caleb's eyes hardened. "A tracker," he said under his breath. Titan's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but he did not lift his head. Caleb did not try to remove it. Not yet. He had pulled enough fragments out of men in the field to know that some things needed proper tools, good light, and a reason not to make the wound worse. He covered the spot carefully and sat back on his heels. A military canine reported dead. found chained behind a salvage man's market post. Starved. Tracked. Caleb looked toward the mantel. For 4 years he had avoided the box. It sat on the highest shelf beneath a folded tarp and a coil of old radio wire. A dark green metal case with worn corners and a latch that had begun to rust. Caleb had carried it from base housing to motel rooms to the cabin, telling himself he would open it when he was ready. He had never been ready. The fire popped softly. Titan gave a faint breath and closed his eyes. Caleb stood. He reached up, pulled the box down, and placed it on the table. Dust lifted into the warm air. For several seconds, he did not open it. His hands rested on the lid, broad and scarred, knuckles pale from pressure. Then he released the latch. Inside were pieces of a life he had tried to bury without a funeral. A folded unit patch, a cracked compass, a black and white photograph from a training range, a tarnished medal he had never worn, a sealed envelope marked with Marcus Hale's name, and beneath it all, wrapped in a cloth, Titan's old collar. Caleb took out the photograph. 3 figures stood in desert sun. Caleb, younger then, face leaner, eyes not yet hollowed by loss. Titan, strong and alert, one ear slightly bent from an old training injury, wearing his working harness like royalty. And Marcus Hale. Marcus had been 37 in the photo, tall and broad, with dark brown skin, a shaved head, and a smile so easy it made everyone around him feel less afraid. He had been the kind of man who remembered birthdays in a unit where most men forgot what month it was. Calm under fire, ruthless when he had to be, gentle with dogs, kids, and anyone carrying grief too heavy to name. Caleb had trusted him with his life before he had trusted most people with a handshake. Marcus had died on the same mission that took Titan, or that was what Caleb had been told. He turned the photograph over. On the back, Marcus had written in block letters, "Bring the dog home if I don't make it." Caleb stared at those words until the ink blurred. A knock came at the door. Titan's eyes opened instantly. His head lifted, his body tensed despite the pain, old training rising through broken muscle. Caleb shut the box, but not before sliding the photograph into his shirt pocket. The knock came again, softer this time. "Caleb?" A woman's voice called from outside. "It's Grace Miller from the market." Caleb moved to the door, one hand low at his side out of habit. When he opened it, Grace stood on the porch with snow collecting on her cream knit hat and the shoulders of her navy coat. She looked smaller against the storm than she had at the market, but not weaker. Grace had the steady expression of someone afraid and determined at the same time. In her arms, she carried a folded gray wool blanket, a paper bag, and a small metal tin. "I'm sorry to come out here," she said. "I know you probably don't want visitors." Caleb looked past her toward the tree line. "Did anyone follow you?" The question seemed to confirm something she already feared. "No," she said. "I took the long road." Caleb opened the door wider. Grace stepped inside and immediately noticed Titan near the fire. Her face softened. Not pity, something more respectful than that. "My father used to work with sled dogs," she said quietly. "He kept supplies after he retired. I brought antiseptic powder, salve, and a blanket. It's old, but clean." Caleb accepted the items with a nod. "Thank you." Grace did not move too close to Titan. She crouched several feet away, letting the dog see her hands. She was careful in a way Caleb noticed, not timid, educated by pain. Titan watched her without growling. That mattered. Grace looked at Caleb. "At the market, I recognized him." Caleb's expression tightened. "You've seen him before?" "Not in person," she swallowed. "In drawings." The cabin seemed to grow colder. Grace set the blanket on the chair and reached into her coat. From an inner pocket, she removed a folded sheet of copy paper, protected inside a plastic sleeve. She hesitated before handing it to him. "One of my students drew this 3 weeks ago." Caleb took it.
The drawing was crude, made with pencil and brown crayon. A dog with one bent ear stood behind a fence. Around its neck was a dark circle that looked like rope. Beside it was a square building and a man with a crooked mouth. In the corner, a black truck sat under heavy scribbled clouds. At the bottom, in a child's careful hand, were the words, "The dog knows Roy." Caleb looked up slowly. Who drew this? Noah Reed, Grace said. He's 10, small for his age, sandy-haired, quiet.
Watches everything. He doesn't speak much unless he feels safe, and lately, he hasn't felt safe anywhere. His mother works nights at the diner. His father left 2 years ago, or that's what people say. Caleb looked back at the drawing. Grace continued, her voice lower now. Noah has drawn that dog at least 6 times, always behind something, a fence, a shed, a truck, sometimes with a rope, sometimes with men standing nearby. I thought it was fear or memory from some stray he had seen. Titan gave a low sound. Both of them looked toward him. Grace said the name carefully. Roy Haskins. Titan came up off the rug so fast his front paws slid on the floor. A growl rolled out of him, deep and shaking. Not loud at first, but full of something old and violent. His lips pulled back, his eyes fixed on the door as if Roy himself had stepped through it. Caleb was beside him in 2 strides. Titan, easy. The dog kept growling. His injured leg trembled. His whole body leaned forward, ready to fight a ghost. Grace went pale, but did not run. Caleb placed a hand on Titan's neck, just above the fresh bandage. Stand down. Titan's breath came hard. Slowly, painfully, he lowered himself back to the rug, but the growl did not disappear completely. It lived under his breathing like thunder far off in the mountains. Grace looked at Caleb. Now there was no doubt in her face. He was there, she whispered, behind Roy's shop. Caleb folded the drawing with great care and placed it beside the metal box. Do you have the others? Grace nodded. At school. Some in my desk. Some Noah keeps hidden in his backpack. I need to see them. Grace glanced toward Titan, then toward the window where snow moved like ash beyond the glass. I think you do, she said. But Caleb, if Noah drew this because he saw something, then Roy isn't just cruel, he's hiding something. Caleb looked down at Titan's scarred body, at the bandage around his neck, at the old tracker buried beneath his skin. Then he looked at Marcus Hale's handwriting on the back of the photo, still resting warm against his chest. Bring the dog home, if I don't make it. Caleb's voice was quiet when he answered. I know. Outside, the storm pressed harder against the cabin walls. Inside, Titan lay before the fire with his eyes open, watching the door as if he remembered every hand that had hurt him, every place they had taken him, and every secret they had buried, believing he would never come home. By morning, the snow over Frostwood had turned hard and pale, packed against curbs, school fences, and the frozen windows of every old building along Main Street. The town looked peaceful from a distance. That was the thing about small mountain towns. From the outside, they always looked like postcards. White roofs, pine trees, smoke curling from chimneys, children's footprints crossing schoolyards, a diner sign glowing red through the cold. But Caleb Walker had learned a long time ago that quiet places could hide the loudest sins. He stood in his cabin doorway just after sunrise, watching Grace Miller's faded blue Subaru crawl up the snowy lane toward Black Pine Ridge. Titan stood beside him, wrapped loosely in the gray wool blanket Grace had brought the night before. The old German shepherd's legs were still weak, and the raw ring around his neck had been cleaned and bandaged, but his eyes were sharper now, not healed, awake. That almost worried Caleb more. Grace parked near the porch and stepped out with a leather satchel tucked under one arm. She wore a long navy coat, brown boots dusted white with road salt, and a cream scarf wrapped close around her throat. In daylight, she looked younger than the worry in her eyes, but that worry had roots. She was the kind of woman who had learned to smile for children, even when adults had given her reasons not to trust them. "You're sure about this?" she asked, as Caleb came down the porch steps. "No," Caleb said, "but I'm sure about the drawings." Grace glanced at Titan. "And him?" Titan looked past her toward the road, ears slightly lifted, as if the world had begun whispering again. "He comes with me," Caleb said. Grace did not argue. Frostwood Elementary sat at the north end of town, a low brick building with green trim, a flagpole bent slightly from years of mountain wind, and a playground half buried beneath snow. Paper snowflakes filled the classroom windows. A painted wooden sign near the entrance read, "Welcome, Frostwood Bears," though one corner had cracked from the cold. The moment Caleb stepped from the truck, conversations stopped. A custodian pushing salt along the walkway paused with his shovel in both hands. Two mothers near the curb looked first at the seal patch on Caleb's jacket, then at Titan limping beside him. A little girl in a pink hat pointed at the dog before her father gently lowered her hand. Titan did not bark. He walked close to Caleb's left leg, slow but controlled, his head low and his eyes moving from face to face. Inside, the school smelled of floor wax, pencil shavings, cafeteria toast, and damp wool coats drying on hooks. The halls were narrow, lined with student art, snowmen, pine trees, crooked stars, paper mittens, and bright winter scenes that tried very hard to make the world look safe. Grace led Caleb toward classroom 3B. A man stepped out of the office before they reached the door. He was in his early 60s, tall but soft around the middle, with silver hair combed carefully to one side and thin, rectangular glasses that made his eyes look smaller than they were. His name was Principal Martin Pruitt. Grace had warned Caleb about him on the drive over. Pruitt was not cruel, exactly. He was the kind of man who believed trouble became worse when spoken out loud. He had spent 30 years protecting the school's reputation, and somewhere along the way he had started confusing silence with safety. "Miss Miller?" Pruitt said, his voice low and cautious. "I was not aware you were bringing visitors." Grace's hand tightened around her satchel. "Officer Walker is here to look at some student materials, with my permission." Caleb did not correct the title. Pruitt's gaze slid down to Titan. "Animals are not allowed in the building." Titan lifted his head. For 1 second, the dog's eyes locked onto Pruitt with such still intelligence that the principal seemed to forget the rest of his sentence. Grace spoke before Caleb could. "Titan is under control, and this is important." Pruitt's mouth pressed into a narrow line. "We do not want to alarm the children." "No," Caleb said quietly. "We don't." The way he said it made Pruitt step back without being told. Classroom 3B was warm, cluttered, and lived in. Books leaned in colorful bins beneath the windows. A globe sat on a shelf beside a jar of dull pencils. The bulletin board was covered with winter writing assignments, but one corner had been left strangely empty, as if something had recently been taken down. A dozen children sat at small desks, turning to stare. Grace's voice softened. "Class, this is Mr. Walker. He's helping me with something. Please keep working on your reading packets." Most of the children obeyed. One did not. In the back row, near the window, a small boy went completely still. Noah Reed was 10 years old, though he looked closer to 8. He had sandy blonde hair that fell into his eyes, pale skin, and shoulders that seemed permanently drawn inward, as if he were trying to make his body take up less space. His sweatshirt was too thin for winter, blue with a faded dinosaur on the front. One sleeve had been chewed at the cuff. His eyes were large, gray-green, and tired in a way no child's eyes should have been. He did not look at Caleb first. He looked at Titan. The pencil slipped from his hand. Titan stopped walking. The room changed. Noah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes filled so quickly that he looked startled by his own tears. Grace took one careful step toward him, but the boy pushed back from his desk and stood. "That's him," Noah whispered. Caleb felt the words hit harder than they should have. Titan gave a low breath and limped forward. Noah covered his mouth with both hands. His small body shook once, then again. He did not run to the dog. He did not reach out. He only stood there crying silently, like someone had opened a door inside him that had been locked for too long. Grace knelt beside his desk. "Noah, honey, you're safe." Noah shook his head. "They said he was bad," he whispered. "But he wasn't. He was scared." Caleb crouched a few feet away, keeping his voice low. "You've seen him before." Noah nodded. Titan lowered himself slowly to the floor, front paws out, head down. It was not a command Caleb had given. It was something older, something trained into him from years of working with frightened people. Make yourself smaller. Make yourself safe. Noah took one step, then another. Finally, he crouched and touched 2 fingers to the top of Titan's head. The dog closed his eyes. Noah broke then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet, exhausted way children cry when they have been carrying adult fear too long. Grace sent the other students to the library with the classroom aide, Mrs. Ellen Price, a round-faced woman in her 50s with kind eyes, short gray curls, and the practical calm of someone who had seen enough school emergencies to know when not to ask questions. She guided the children out with soft instructions and one worried glance back at Noah. When the room was empty, Grace pulled a folder from her locked desk drawer. Inside were drawings. Not 1, not 6, more than 20. Caleb spread them across the reading table one by one. At first, they looked like ordinary children's pictures made with crayon and pencil. Crooked lines, uneven shapes, heavy shading. But the longer Caleb looked, the less childlike they became. A black truck with no license plate. A white star painted on the driver's door. A long wooden building near railroad tracks. A dog in a metal cage. Men in dark coats carrying wooden crates. A symbol burned or stamped onto the side of one crate. An eagle with its wings spread over a broken circle. Caleb's fingers stopped on that drawing. The air seemed to leave the room. Grace noticed. "You know that symbol?" Caleb did not answer right away. His mind was suddenly thousands of miles from Frostwood, back in heat and dust and the metallic taste of danger before sunrise. Afghanistan. A staging yard outside a walled compound. Crates marked with that same eagle. A mission brief that had felt wrong. Marcus Hale standing beside him, frowning at shipping labels no one wanted him to read. "Yes," Caleb said finally. "I've seen it before." Noah looked down at the floor. "They made him smell a bag," he said. Caleb turned to him slowly. "Who did?" "The men behind Roy's shop." Noah's voice was thin, but once the words started, they came like water through a crack. "At night, black trucks came after the store closed. Mr. Roy yelled at the dog. He called him Scrap, but one man called him something else. Caleb's hands tightened. What did he call him? Noah swallowed. Asset. Grace closed her eyes briefly, as if the word hurt. Noah continued, staring at Titan instead of Caleb. They had an old green bag, like army stuff. They pushed it at his nose. He didn't want to smell it. He backed up. Mr. Roy hit the cage with a metal stick. Then the tall man said the dog was broken. Caleb's voice stayed calm because it had to. Tall man? Noah nodded and reached for another drawing. This one was darker than the others. A man stood beside the black truck, taller than the rest, with square shoulders, a long coat, and a line across his chin colored red. He had a scar here, Noah said, touching his own chin. Caleb looked at the drawing. A man with a scar across his jaw, a black truck, wooden crates, the eagle symbol. He made himself breathe.
Grace sat beside Noah. You also drew a building near tracks.
Is that a real place? Noah hesitated. I don't know its name. It's in the trees, past the old rental houses. My mom says I'm not supposed to go near the tracks. Why were you there? Caleb asked gently. Noah's face flushed with shame. I was looking for my bike. Some older boys threw it down the hill. I heard trucks. I hid. Then I saw Mr. Roy. Grace touched his shoulder. You did the right thing telling us. Noah shook his head hard. I didn't tell. I drew it. That counts, Grace said. Sometimes drawing is telling. A knock came softly on the classroom door. A woman stood outside, one hand gripping the strap of a cheap black purse. Lena Reed looked like someone's sleep had forgotten. She was 32, narrow-shouldered, with light brown hair pulled into a messy bun and dark circles beneath anxious hazel eyes. Her diner uniform was hidden under a thin tan coat, but the smell of coffee and fryer grease clung to her sleeves.
She had the guarded expression of a mother who had learned to expect bad news every time someone said her son's name. Noah? She said, stepping in quickly. The boy went to her at once. Lena wrapped both arms around him, then looked at Caleb, at Grace, and finally at Titan. When she saw the dog, something in her face collapsed. Oh, God, she whispered. That's the dog. Caleb stood. You've seen him too? Lena's lips trembled. Behind Roy's, months ago, maybe longer. I work nights at Millie's Diner near the South Road. Roy came in after closing sometimes with men I didn't know. One of them had a military way about him, older, clean coat. Everyone got quiet when he talked. Grace asked, Did you hear a name? Lena hesitated too long. Caleb saw fear move through her before she spoke. Voss, she said. Roy called him Colonel Voss once. Then the man looked at him like he wanted to cut his tongue out. Caleb's face went still. Grace noticed again. You know that name too? Caleb looked down at Titan. The old dog had lifted his head at the sound of it. Voss. The name sat in the classroom like a loaded weapon. Lena spoke faster now, as if fear had become momentum. I asked Roy about the dog once, just once. I told him he looked hurt. 2 mornings later, I found my tires slashed, all 4. No note, no warning, just cut clean. She pulled Noah tighter against her side. I stopped asking questions. Noah whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. Lena bent down and kissed the top of his head. No, baby, no. Grace stood then, and Caleb saw the change in her. The soft teacher was still there, but something harder had stepped forward with her. The widow who had survived loss, the woman who had seen children go silent and decided silence would not get the last word. Noah is staying with me after school, Grace said, until we know what this is. Lena looked terrified and relieved at the same time. I don't want to bring trouble to you. Grace's answer was quiet. It's already here. Caleb gathered the drawings carefully, not taking the originals. He asked Grace to make copies in the school office while he photographed each page with his phone, front and back, including dates, pencil marks, and Noah's small handwriting. He did not make promises he could not keep. He did not say everything would be fine. Men who said that too quickly usually had no idea what was coming. But when Noah looked up at him, Caleb said the only thing he knew was true. You were brave. Noah shook his head. I was scared. Caleb glanced at Titan, scarred and limping beside the reading table. Brave usually is. Outside the classroom window, snow began falling again, soft at first, covering the playground, the road, the tire tracks near the curb. Frostwood carried on beyond the glass like nothing had changed. But inside classroom 3B, the truth had taken shape in crayon, pencil, and a child's trembling voice. Caleb looked once more at the eagle symbol on the wooden crate. He had last seen that mark before the mission that killed Marcus Hale and erased Titan from the world. Now it had surfaced in a child's drawing in a Montana schoolroom, and whatever Roy Haskins had hidden behind his salvage shop, whatever Colonel Voss had dragged into Frostwood under cover of night, Caleb knew one thing with absolute certainty. Titan had not been chained because he was worthless. He had been chained because he remembered. The storm passed sometime before dawn, but Frostwood did not wake clean. It woke buried. Snow sat heavy on rooftops, sagged from power lines, and sealed the edges of the roads in hard white ridges left behind by the county plows. The sky had cleared into a pale blue that looked almost innocent, the kind of cold morning that made every window shine and every secret feel sharper beneath the ice. Caleb Walker stood in his cabin kitchen with a cup of black coffee untouched beside him. Titan lay near the stone fireplace, his bandaged neck resting on the gray wool blanket Grace had brought. The old German shepherd had slept in pieces through the night, never deeply, never peacefully. Twice he had jerked awake with his paws scraping against the rug. Once he had lifted his head and growled at nothing but the wind moving through the pines. Caleb had not slept much either. On the table in front of him were printed copies of Noah Reed's drawings. Grace had made them after school, careful to keep the originals safe. Caleb had arranged them in order by the dates written in the corner: the black truck, the dog behind the fence, the white star on the door, the wooden crates, the eagle symbol, the tall man with the scar. Beside them lay a small notebook where Caleb had written every detail Noah and Lena had given him. He did not write theories. He wrote facts. That was how you stayed alive when emotion wanted to pull the trigger before truth loaded the chamber. Titan raised his head when Caleb put on his dark green military jacket. "No," Caleb said, before the dog could try to stand. "Not this time." Titan stared at him. Caleb knew that look. He had seen it in training yards, desert compounds, burned-out villages, and once under a collapsed wall while smoke rolled over them both. Titan had never believed in staying behind. But Caleb looked at the bandage around his neck and the tremor in his back leg. "You're not ready." Titan gave one low sound, almost offended. Caleb stepped closer and placed a hand between his ears. "I need eyes, not a fight." The dog did not like the answer, but he lowered his head back onto the blanket. By 9 o'clock, Caleb's pickup rolled down the south road toward Haskins' second-hand and salvage. He drove slowly, not because the snow was bad, but because patience was part of the job. Rage had been waiting in his chest since the moment he saw Titan beneath that $1 sign. Rage at the rope, rage at the scars, rage at the word asset coming from a frightened child's memory. But rage made noise, and Caleb needed silence. Roy Haskins's shop sat beyond the last clean edge of Frostwood, where town gave way to industrial lots, railroad brush, and old storage yards that had not seen honest work in years. The building was a low, crooked structure of corrugated metal and weather-beaten wood, with a faded sign hanging over the front door: Haskins Second-Hand and Salvage, Tools, Parts. Trade, cash only. Broken refrigerators, bent bicycles, rusted snowblowers, cracked bathtubs, and stacks of used tires leaned against the fence like a junkyard, trying to pretend it was a business. A yellow dog bowl sat near the porch, half buried under frozen snow. Caleb parked in the front lot, in plain view of the road. No sneaking, no trespassing. No mistake Roy could use later. A bell above the door gave a tired jangle when Caleb stepped inside. The shop smelled of oil, damp cardboard, old leather, and cold metal. Shelves sagged under the weight of cracked lamps, coffee makers with missing cords, dusty hunting decoys, and boxes of mismatched bolts. A wood stove burned near the back, but the heat never reached the front. Roy Haskins looked up from behind the counter. He wore the same stained brown coat from the market, only now his greasy ball cap sat lower over his eyes. In daylight he looked older and meaner, his red face lined with broken veins, His gray beard clumped around his jaw. Roy was a man built out of resentment. Everything about him seemed to say the world owed him money and respect, and he had collected neither honestly. "Well," Roy said, "if it ain't the dog buyer." Caleb closed the door behind him. "I want to know where you found him." Roy snorted and went back to sorting a coffee can full of screws. "Told you already. Roadside." "Which road?" "Don't remember. You said truck stop yesterday." Roy's hand paused for half a second, then he shrugged. "Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I pick up junk all over." Caleb walked closer to the counter but did not lean on it. "A dog like that doesn't just appear. Someone had him before you." Roy looked up then. His eyes were small and wet and full of irritation. "You some kind of animal cop now?" "No." "Then why don't you take your busted mutt and feel heroic somewhere else?" Caleb's voice stayed even. "How long did you have him?" Roy smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Long enough to know he ain't worth the dollar." Behind the counter, a radio whispered static. Somewhere in the back room, metal shifted with a dull scrape, probably snow sliding off the roof. But Roy's eyes flicked toward the sound too quickly. Caleb noticed. He let the silence sit between them. Roy hated it first. "You done?" he snapped. "Almost." Caleb turned toward the side aisle, where a grimy window looked out over the fenced yard behind the shop. Through the glass, he saw tire tracks pressed into the snow. Not old ones. The edges were too sharp. They curved behind the building and disappeared toward the tree line. Roy stepped out from behind the counter. "Private area back there." "I'm still inside." "You're looking." Caleb glanced at him. "That illegal now?" Roy's face tightened. "You military boys always think rules only work one way." Caleb did not answer. He walked toward the front door, then paused beside a rack of used leashes and collars hanging from a pegboard. One collar was heavy black nylon, stiff with wear. Another had dried brown stains along the buckle. He looked at Roy. Roy looked away. Outside, the cold hit Caleb hard enough to sting his eyes. He walked to his truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. He drove a quarter-mile down the road, turned around at an abandoned gas station, and returned slowly, parking this time near the public shoulder beside the salvage yard fence. He did not cross the posted line. He did not open the gate. He stood where the county right-of-way ended, pretending to check a loose strap in his truck bed, while his eyes read the snow behind Roy's property. From that angle, the back of the shop was visible. So was the truth Roy had tried to hide. A blood-dark chain lay coiled near a post behind the building, half covered by fresh snow, but not enough. Beside it sat a metal water bowl, frozen solid, with a thin skin of dirty ice crusted around the rim. Against the rear wall, Caleb saw drag marks where something heavy had recently been moved. A rectangle in the snow marked the place where a cage or kennel had stood for a long time. At the far fence, the snow was broken by many boot prints. Some led into the trees, others came back. Caleb took out his phone and photographed only what could be seen from the road. No shortcuts, no evidence ruined by anger. Then something moved near the fence. A strip of fabric fluttered from the lower wire, caught where someone had pulled away too fast. Caleb walked along the public side of the fence until he stood near it. He did not reach over. He used the zoom on his phone first, then a small evidence bag from his truck and a pair of tweezers from his field kit, leaning carefully through a gap where the fence had bent outward into public snow. The cloth was dark green nylon, torn clean on one side and frayed on the other. Even before he held it, Caleb recognized the weave. Military transport fabric, the kind used on equipment bags built to survive sand, rain, and rough handling. He had seen that fabric in staging yards, on cargo pallets, and once on a green bag shoved into Titan's nose in Noah Reed's trembling memory. The back door of the shop slammed open. "What the hell are you doing?" Roy came around the corner fast, boots sliding, one hand clenched around a rusted tire iron. His face had gone purple-red now, fury and panic fighting under his skin. Caleb sealed the bag and held it at his side. "Standing on public road." "That's my fence." "This side isn't." Roy pointed the tire iron at him. "You get out of here." Caleb looked past him at the chain, the frozen bowl, the missing cage mark. "You should call the sheriff," Caleb said calmly. Roy blinked, thrown by the suggestion. Caleb stepped back toward his truck. "Tell them exactly what I took and where I was standing." Roy did not call anyone. That told Caleb more than a confession would have. Across town, Grace Miller was having a worse morning than she admitted to anyone. Principal Martin Pruitt called her into his office just after lunch. The office was warm, over-decorated with framed certificates, school board plaques, and a ceramic bear painted by a former student. Pruitt sat behind his desk with his hands folded carefully, as if he could keep the whole world orderly by keeping his fingers still. "Miss Miller," he said, "I'm concerned." Grace stood instead of taking the chair he offered. "That usually means someone else complained?" Pruitt sighed. "A parent mentioned that certain students have been encouraged to discuss frightening subjects. Dogs in cages, men at night, trucks, weapons, perhaps." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Who said weapons?" Pruitt looked away. That was enough. "I never said weapons to my class," Grace said. "Then perhaps your students are imagining things. Or perhaps they're remembering things." Pruitt's face tightened. "This school cannot become a place where children are pushed into fear." Grace's voice stayed calm, but cold. "Some of them are already afraid. They were just afraid quietly enough for adults to ignore." Before Pruitt could answer, his office phone rang. He glanced at the screen, hesitated, then let it go to voicemail. Grace noticed the hesitation. She also noticed the way he avoided looking at the folder on the corner of his desk. When she left the office, a woman was waiting near classroom 3B. She was in her 40s, tall and narrow, with straight black hair cut just below her chin, a charcoal coat too expensive for frostwood, and leather gloves fitted so perfectly they looked unused by real weather. Her face was composed in a polished way, but her eyes moved quickly over the hallway, the classroom door, Grace's satchel, then Noah Reed's empty desk visible through the window. "Miss Miller?" the woman asked with a pleasant smile. Grace stopped. "Yes?" "My name is Audrey Vale. I'm assisting with a community safety review." Her voice was smooth, practiced, and empty of warmth. "I understand one of your students has been making troubling drawings. We'd like to collect them before they cause distress." Grace did not move. "Who is we?" Audrey's smile held. "Concerned adults." "That isn't an office." "No, but it is a responsibility." Grace looked at the woman's gloves, then at the visitor badge clipped to her coat. It had no district logo, only a handwritten name. "Student work stays with the school," Grace said. Audrey's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes hardened. "Sometimes protecting a child means making sure his imagination doesn't ruin lives." Grace stepped closer. "Sometimes protecting a child means believing him before adults erase him." For 3 seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Audrey's phone buzzed. She glanced down, read something, and her smile returned. "Have a careful day, Miss Miller." Grace watched her walk toward the exit, heels clicking softly against the waxed floor. The moment Audrey disappeared, Grace went into her classroom, locked the door, and opened the bottom drawer of her desk. The original drawings were still there, wrapped in a manila envelope beneath construction paper. Her hands shook only after she had them in her satchel. 20 minutes later, during her planning period, Grace drove to St. Bridget's Church at the edge of town.
The church was small and old, built of dark stone with a red door and narrow stained glass windows that caught the snowlight in faded blue and gold. Inside, it smelled of candle wax, wood polish, and old hymnals. Pastor Ruth Calder met her near the side aisle.
Ruth was 71, short and sturdy, with silver hair cut close to her head and a voice that could comfort a grieving widow or silence a drunk man in the same breath. She had known Grace since the funeral of Grace's husband and had never once asked for more sorrow than Grace was ready to give. Grace handed her a sealed metal document box. "Can you keep this in the archive room?" Ruth studied her face. "Is this about a child?" Grace nodded. Ruth took the box without another question. "Then it stays here." That evening, Caleb returned to the South Road just before dark. This time he parked half a mile away, near the old county turnout, where a stand of pines hid his truck from the salvage yard but gave him a clear view of the road. He remained on public land, binoculars resting against the steering wheel, notebook open on his knee. At 8:17 p.m., the black truck arrived. No plates, white star on the driver's door. It rolled behind Roy's shop with its headlights off until the last second. Roy came out fast, shoulders hunched, no tire iron now, just fear. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped down. He had silver hair cut close, a long, dark overcoat, and a scar that ran across his chin like a pale blade mark. Even from the distance, Caleb recognized the posture before he fully saw the face. Victor Voss, former logistics commander, the man who had signed Titan's death confirmation, the man who had stood beside Caleb after the mission and said there was nothing left to bring home. Caleb's hand tightened around the binoculars. Behind the glass, Voss turned his head slightly toward the road, as if old predators could feel when they were being watched. Caleb did not move, did not blink, did not reach for a weapon. He only wrote the time, the truck, the mark, and the name. Because now the ghost from Afghanistan had stepped into Frostwood, and Titan's scars had finally found a face. By the next morning, Frostwood looked less like a town and more like something that had been sealed under glass. The snow had hardened overnight. It shone blue under the early sun, smooth over rooftops and sharp along the tire ruts that cut through Main Street. People were out again, scraping windshields, carrying coffee, pretending the storm had been the only thing worth worrying about. Caleb Walker knew better. He stood beside his kitchen table at Black Pine Ridge, looking down at the copies of Noah Reed's drawings, the photographs from Roy Haskins' salvage yard, and the sealed evidence bag holding the torn strip of dark green nylon. Titan stood beside him now, not lying by the fireplace. The old German shepherd was still weak, still bandaged, still thinner than any working dog should ever be, but there was something different in his posture. His head was low, his ears were forward, his eyes kept returning to the same drawing, the long wooden building near the railroad tracks. Caleb had placed that drawing next to the map of Frostwood County he had pulled from his glove box. Noah's lines were crooked, childish, and full of fear. But fear remembered details in strange ways. A slanted roof, tracks curving behind a ridge, a tree line on one side, a drainage ditch on the other. There was only one place near Frostwood that matched: the old Black Pine Lumber Warehouse. It had once belonged to North Star Mining and Timber, a company that cut pine out of the ridge and hauled equipment by rail before the mine dried up and the owners left town with unpaid wages and lawsuits behind them. The warehouse had been closed for more than 10 years. Officially, it was empty. Unofficially, empty buildings were like old wounds. They attracted whatever wanted to hide. Caleb did not load a rifle. He did not storm the place. He made a call. Sheriff Laura Bennett answered on the third ring. Laura Bennett was 45, lean, dark-haired, and carried herself with the controlled patience of someone who had spent too many years being underestimated by louder men. She had sharp brown eyes, a weather-lined face, and a habit of listening longer than people expected. Frost would have elected her 8 months earlier, after the previous sheriff retired under a cloud of complaints no one ever fully explained. Laura was not warm in the easy way, but she was fair, and in a town like Frostwood, fair could look almost revolutionary. "Walker," she said, "I was wondering when you'd call." Caleb looked at Titan. "About Roy Haskins? About whatever made you park near his place last night?" Caleb almost smiled. "You have eyes on the South Road?" "I have deputies who talk too much, and one gas station clerk who sees everything. What do you have?" "Not enough for court," Caleb said. "Enough to need you." There was a pause. Then Laura said, "Bring it in." The Frostwood Sheriff's Office sat beside the courthouse annex, a square brick building with a flag out front and salt stains along the steps. Caleb arrived with Titan in the passenger seat and a folder under his arm. Titan refused to stay in the truck. Caleb considered arguing with him for 3 seconds, then opened the door. Inside, the front desk was staffed by Deputy Owen Price, a broad-shouldered man in his late 20s with a round face, close-cropped blonde hair, and the eager nervousness of someone still trying to prove he deserved the badge. He glanced at Titan, then at Caleb's jacket, then toward the sheriff's office. "She's waiting." Sheriff Bennett's office was neat but not decorative. No inspirational posters, no polished trophies. Just a county map on the wall, 3 filing cabinets, a coffee mug full of pens, and a photograph of Laura standing beside an older man in a firefighter's coat. Her father, Caleb guessed. Maybe dead. Maybe the reason she looked at dangerous things without flinching. Laura stood when Titan entered. She did not reach for him. Smart. "That him?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "Titan." Laura studied the dog's bent ear, his scarred muzzle, the bandage around his neck, the old discipline still visible beneath the damage. Her expression changed, but only slightly. "Hell of a thing to do to a service dog." "It wasn't random." Caleb laid out the file. He showed her the drawings, the photos of the chain and frozen bowl behind Roy's shop, the drag mark where the cage had been, the tire tracks, the strip of nylon, and the notes from Lena Reed's statement about Roy and a man called Colonel Voss. Laura listened without interrupting. When Caleb reached the part about Victor Voss signing Titan's death report 4 years earlier, her eyes lifted. "You can prove that?" "I have the military report." "Can you get it officially?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Not easily." Laura leaned back. "Then it helps me understand, but it doesn't get me a warrant." "I know." She tapped the photo of the drag marks. "This is suspicious. Not enough. The child's drawings matter, but a judge will want corroboration. Roy's yard might get us animal cruelty if we can connect the dog to him, but the warehouse?" She shook her head once. "I need something near that property, something physical, something current." Caleb looked down at Titan. The dog had gone still, not relaxed, still. His nose pointed toward the office door, but his eyes were not on the hallway. They were somewhere far away, tracking a memory no human could see. Laura noticed. "What is he doing?" Caleb said, "Working." 20 minutes later, Caleb, Sheriff Bennett, and Titan drove toward the old Black Pine Road in 2 vehicles. Laura followed in her county SUV, leaving Deputy Price behind with instructions to pull old property records on the lumber warehouse and check whether any recent complaints had come from the South Road. Caleb drove ahead, slow, letting Titan feel the road. They did not go onto the warehouse property. Laura made that clear before they left. "We stay on County Road unless there's exigent cause," she said. "No hero entry, no broken chain, no private search dressed up as instinct." Caleb had respected her more after that. The road narrowed after the last rental houses near the tracks. Snow lay untouched in the ditches. The pines grew thick on both sides, tall and black-green, their branches sagging under ice. Old rail lines ran parallel to the road for a while, half buried and rusted,
appearing and disappearing beneath snow like bones. Titan began to shake before the warehouse came into view. Not from cold. His nose lifted. His breath came faster.
A low sound built in his throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine. Caleb slowed the truck. "You have something?" Titan pressed his nose against the cracked window gap and inhaled sharply. Caleb pulled over near a county drainage ditch, still well short of the old warehouse access road. Laura stopped behind him and stepped out, one hand resting lightly near her sidearm, eyes scanning the trees. What did he catch? Caleb opened Titan's door. The dog stepped down carefully, pain flashing through his bad hind leg, then turned toward the ditch. Snow had drifted against the bank, but wind had scoured one patch thin. Titan limped down slowly, nose to the ground. Caleb followed, but did not touch anything. Laura came beside him, already pulling gloves from her pocket. Titan stopped near a broken wooden crate, half buried under snow and ice. It had slid or fallen into the ditch from somewhere above. One side was cracked open. The wood was weathered, but not old enough to belong to the lumber company. Black stenciling had been scraped away from most of the surface, but a corner of white paint remained under the ice. Caleb saw it before Laura did. Part of a star. Titan backed away suddenly and growled. Laura crouched, careful not to disturb the crate. "Smell?" Caleb's voice was low. "Explosive residue, maybe. Old powder, fuel. Something he knows." Laura looked at him. "You're guessing?" "I'm reading him." She studied Titan for a second, then reached for her radio. "Price, get me county evidence gloves, bags, and a camera kit out to Black Pine Road. Also call Judge Harlan's clerk. Tell her I may need an emergency warrant review." As they waited, Caleb saw something caught under the broken slat of the crate. A paper label, partly torn, with a shipping code that had been printed over another code. False labeling. The kind used to make one shipment look like another if no one looked too closely. Beside the label was a narrow strip of gray binding cord. Caleb felt his chest tighten. It matched the rope burn around Titan's neck. Not the market rope, something older. Something synthetic, military grade, the kind that could secure cargo or restrain an animal without snapping. Laura photographed everything before touching it. When she finally lifted the broken lid with gloved fingers, something small fell into the snow, a metal fragment. At first it looked like scrap. Then Laura turned it over with the tip of a pen. It was part of a military badge or unit marker, the serial edge deliberately ground down until the numbers were almost gone. But the shape remained. So did the faint outline of an eagle wing stamped into the metal. Caleb did not speak. He did not have to. Laura saw his face. "This connects to your old symbol?" "Yes." "Can you testify to that?" "I can testify that I saw that mark on equipment during my last overseas operation." Laura nodded once. "Then we may have enough for a warrant to search the warehouse grounds. Maybe the building if the judge agrees the crate came from that property." Caleb looked toward the trees. Through a gap in the pines, he could see the roofline of the old black pine lumber warehouse, dark and slanted beneath the snow. It sat back from the road like something waiting in silence. No smoke, no lights, no movement. But Titan stared at it as if he could hear breathing inside. Back at Frostwood Elementary, Grace Miller found the last drawing after the final bell. Noah had been quiet all day, quieter than usual. He had sat near the window, flinching whenever a truck passed the street. Grace had kept him close, walked him to lunch herself, and checked the hallway twice before dismissal. Lena was supposed to pick him up after her shift at Millie's diner, and Grace had watched Noah put on his thin blue jacket and backpack. But when Grace returned to his desk to collect a forgotten reading sheet, she saw the corner of a paper sticking out from inside the cubby. It was folded once. Her name was written on the outside, Miss Miller. The drawing inside made her sit down. It was Titan. There was no mistaking the bent ear, the long scar, the dark eyes. The dog stood at the top of a staircase facing a metal door. The door had heavy hinges and a small square window. Around it, Noah had drawn lines like walls underground. At the bottom of the page, in small block letters, he had written, "He knows the door under the floor." Grace's skin went cold. The classroom seemed suddenly too quiet. She grabbed her phone and called Lena. No answer. She called again. This time, Lena picked up, breathless. "Grace, is Noah still with you?" Grace stood so fast the chair scraped the floor. "No, he left for pickup." Silence. Then Lena's voice broke. "He never came out." Grace was already moving toward the hall. At the sheriff's office, Laura Bennett was drafting the warrant request when Caleb's phone rang. Grace's name flashed on the screen. He answered. Her voice was controlled, but only barely. "Noah is missing." Caleb stood. Titan lifted his head from the floor instantly. Grace continued, words rushing now. "He left a drawing, a new one. Titan in front of a metal door underground. Caleb, I think he saw inside that place." Before Caleb could answer, another call came through Laura's desk phone. Deputy Price picked it up outside the office, then appeared in the doorway, pale-faced. "Sheriff," he said, "Lena Reed is here. She says she needs to tell you about Noah's father." Laura looked from him to Caleb. Lena entered moments later, like a woman who had run through more fear than snow. Her hair was coming loose from its bun, her diner coat hung open, and her hands shook around a folded photograph. She looked smaller than she had at the school. Not weak, but worn down by years of surviving one bad choice after another. "Noah's dad," she said, voice cracking. "His name was Peter Reed. He didn't just leave us." Caleb stayed very still. Lena pushed the photograph onto Laura's desk. It showed a thin man in his 30s, with tired eyes, a trucker cap, and one arm around a much younger Noah. He looked like the kind of man who smiled only when his son was watching. "He drove for Roy," Lena said. "Late-night loads, cash jobs. He said it was scrap, old tools, salvage parts. Then one night he came home shaking. Said there was military equipment in the crates. Said there was a dog in a cage that understood commands better than most men. He wanted out." Her voice dropped. A week later, he disappeared. Laura's jaw tightened. Caleb looked at the drawing Grace had just sent to his phone. Titan before a metal door. A hidden place beneath the warehouse. Noah gone after school. The warrant had not been signed yet, but the case had changed. Titan rose slowly, painfully, and moved to Caleb's side. The old dog pressed his shoulder against Caleb's leg, eyes locked on the door, ready to follow a trail he had been forced to remember for 4 years. Caleb looked at Sheriff Bennett. Laura was already reaching for her coat. "Now," she said. And outside, over Frostwood, the sky darkened again, as if the forest itself had been waiting for the child's to vanish before giving up its dead. The storm reached Frostwood before the search did. By the time Caleb Walker, Grace Miller, and Sheriff Laura Bennett pulled out of the sheriff's office, the sky had folded itself into a wall of gray. Snow came sideways across Main Street, hard and fast, turning headlights into pale smears and swallowing the tops of parked cars. The wind moved through the town like something alive, rattling signs, shaking windows, and pushing loose powder across the road in ghostly ribbons. Noah Reed was missing. That single fact sat heavier than the storm. Caleb drove with both hands steady on the wheel, but inside him, old instincts had gone cold and sharp. There was no room for panic. Panic wasted time. Panic missed details. Panic got people killed. In the passenger seat, Titan stood braced against the dashboard, his bandaged neck stretched forward, his scarred muzzle pointed toward the windshield. The old German shepherd's body should have been resting beside a fire, but his eyes were alive with purpose now, bright and fixed, as if the storm itself had opened a trail only he could see. Grace sat in the back seat, holding one of Noah's gloves in both hands. It was small, blue, cheap, and still faintly damp from a child's pocket. Her face had gone pale, but she did not fall apart. Her reddish-brown hair had come loose beneath her knit hat, and snowflakes clung to her coat every time the door opened. She was a teacher by habit, gentle by nature, but grief had carved strength into her years before. Now, that strength held her upright. Sheriff Laura Bennett followed behind them in her county SUV, lights flashing blue and red through the blowing snow. Laura had called in 2 deputies before leaving town. Deputy Owen Price, young and broad-shouldered with a nervous loyalty that made him check every command twice, was taking the main road toward the tracks. The second deputy was Marisol Kane, a compact woman in her late 30s, with black hair tucked under a sheriff's beanie and calm eyes that missed very little. Marisol had been a search and rescue volunteer before becoming a deputy, and she spoke rarely because, as Laura once said, she preferred evidence over noise. The warrant was still being pushed through. The child could not wait for paper. Titan took the glove from Grace gently when Caleb pulled over near the old railroad crossing. He lowered his nose to it, breathed once, then twice, and stepped down into the snow before Caleb could tell him to wait. His bad hind leg trembled as he landed, but he did not slow. He crossed the road, moved past the rusted crossing sign, and headed toward the tree line. "He has it," Caleb said. Grace swallowed hard. "Then we follow him." The forest swallowed them within minutes. Black Pine Ridge was different at night. The pines stood close together, their trunks dark and wet, their branches sagging under snow. The old railroad tracks cut through the trees like a forgotten scar, half buried under ice. Wind dragged snow across the rails until they appeared and disappeared beneath Caleb's boots. Titan moved ahead, nose low, tail stiff, fighting through pain with every step. Grace slipped once on the frozen track, and Caleb caught her arm before she fell. "I'm okay," she said quickly. "No one is okay out here," Caleb answered. "Stay close." Sheriff Laura moved behind them with her flashlight angled low, careful not to wash out Titan's scent path. Marisol Kane joined them near the bend in the tracks, carrying a medical pack and a radio clipped high on her shoulder. Her cheeks were red from the cold, but her voice stayed even. "Price found fresh tire marks by the South Access Road," she said. "No plates, wide tread, recent." Laura's jaw tightened. "Tell him to hold position and not enter alone." Marisol relayed the order. Titan stopped suddenly. His head snapped toward the right, away from the tracks and into the deeper woods. A low growl came from his chest. Caleb crouched beside him, touched 2 fingers to the snow, and saw what the dog had found. A drag mark. Thin at first, then deeper. Something, or someone, had been pulled through the powder toward the old warehouse. Grace made a small sound she tried to bury. Caleb looked back at her. "He's alive until we know otherwise." She nodded, but tears had frozen at the edge of her lashes. They followed the drag mark until the trees opened and the Black Pine warehouse rose out of the storm. The building looked dead from the outside, long, wooden, warped by years of snow and neglect, with a sagging metal roof and broken windows patched in places by plywood. Old mining company numbers still clung to one wall in faded paint. The loading dock leaned at an angle. Behind it, the railroad spur vanished beneath drifts. Titan did not go to the front entrance. He led them around the side. There, behind stacked pallets and a rusted fuel drum, a door stood slightly open. Caleb raised one hand. Everyone stopped. No voices, no rushing, no mistake. Laura drew her sidearm and nodded to Marisol. Caleb did not draw his weapon first. He held Titan's collar lightly, feeling the old dog vibrating beneath his hand. Grace stayed back by the wall, clutching Noah's glove to her chest. Inside, The warehouse smelled of dust, oil, wet wood, and something chemical underneath. Caleb knew that smell. Old explosive residue. Not enough to burn the nose, but enough to wake memories better left buried. Their flashlights moved across the floor. Drag marks cut through the dust. Wooden crates sat stacked near the far wall, some new, some stained, some marked with false shipping labels. A few had military-style straps wrapped around them. Papers lay scattered over a folding table, fake invoices, route maps, and lists of names with numbers beside them. Not just goods, people, drivers, veterans, men who had needed money, medication, work, silence. Laura's face hardened when she saw the files. They were using former service members, she said quietly. Caleb did not answer. His eyes had found something else, a square outline in the floor. Titan was already there, pawing weakly at the edge of a thick wooden panel hidden beneath dust and saw shavings. Caleb and Marisol pulled it aside together. A narrow set of stairs dropped into darkness below the warehouse. Grace stepped forward despite Laura's warning. "Noah?" From somewhere beneath the floor, faint and broken, came a child's voice. "Miss Miller?" Grace nearly ran, but Caleb caught her shoulder. "Slow," he said. "We get him out clean." They descended into the basement with Caleb first, Laura behind him, then Marisol. Grace waited at the top until Laura gave permission. The lower level was colder than the warehouse, damp and close, built from concrete and old steel supports. A single bulb swung from a wire near the ceiling, throwing weak light over metal shelves, locked cabinets, and a small room at the back with a heavy iron door. Titan reached the door first. He pressed his nose to the bottom crack and whined. Caleb found the latch and pulled. It stuck once, then opened with a scream of metal. Noah Reed was curled in the corner beneath a torn canvas tarp. He was alive. The boy's lips were blue, his sandy hair damp against his forehead, his thin blue jacket powdered with dust. His hands were tied in front of him with gray binding cord, not tight enough to cut deeply, but enough to terrify. When he saw Grace, his face crumpled. She pushed past Caleb then, and nobody stopped her. "Noah," she whispered, dropping to her knees and wrapping him in her coat. "I've got you. I've got you." Noah clung to her like a drowning child. Caleb cut the cord with his knife, his movements precise and gentle. Titan lowered himself beside the boy, pressing his warm body against Noah's legs. The child reached for the dog's fur with shaking fingers. "He heard them," Noah whispered. "Titan heard them too." Laura crouched. "Who, Noah?" "The tall man, the one with the scar." Noah's teeth chattered. "He said they had to move the last shipment before the storm cleared. He said the old dog was the only living mistake from the mission." Caleb went still. Noah looked up at him, eyes wide and haunted. "He said Titan should have died with Marcus." For 1 second, the basement disappeared. Caleb was back in heat and smoke and falling concrete, Marcus Hale shouting his name, Titan barking through fire. A report later signed in clean ink by a man who had called both of them dead enough to bury. A sound came from upstairs. Boots. Laura stood. "Marisol, get the boy up." They moved fast. Grace wrapped Noah in Marisol's emergency blanket and helped guide him toward the stairs. Caleb stayed behind them, Titan limping at his side. They reached the warehouse floor just as the side door burst open. Victor Voss stepped in from the snow. He was taller up close than Caleb remembered, broad through the shoulders, silver hair swept back, his long black coat dusted white from the storm. The scar across his chin pulled slightly when he smiled. Age had not softened him. It had sharpened him into something cold and polished. Behind him came 2 men. One was heavy-set, with a shaved head and a thick neck, holding a pry bar like a weapon. The other was younger, narrow-faced,
restless-eyed, wearing black gloves and a dark jacket. Voss looked at Caleb first, then at Titan. His smile faded.
"Well," he said softly, "the dead keep disappointing me tonight."
Caleb positioned himself between Voss and Noah. Laura moved to the left, weapon raised but steady.
Marisol drew Noah and Grace back behind a crate stack. Voss did not seem impressed.
"You always were sentimental, Walker," he said. "That dog should have been Ash beside Marcus. Instead, here you are, chasing ghosts through Montana like grief makes you righteous."
Caleb's hand stayed open at his side. His voice was flat.
"You signed the report. I signed many reports. You said Titan was dead."
Voss glanced at the dog.
"He was supposed to be."
The younger man suddenly lunged toward Noah, maybe thinking the child was easier leverage than the adults. Titan moved before anyone else. Old, wounded, half-starved, he still crossed the space like the canine he had once been. He slammed into the man's arm and locked his teeth into the black glove. The man screamed and dropped hard against the crate stack. Noah cried out. Grace pulled him back. Caleb stepped in, disarmed the man, and drove him to the floor. Laura fired one warning shot into the wooden beam above Voss's shoulder. "Down!"
she shouted. Marisol covered the heavy-set man before he could raise the pry bar. Deputy Owen Price appeared at the side door seconds later with two more officers behind him, snow blowing around their legs, weapons trained and voices controlled. Voss looked around and understood the room had turned. Slowly, almost elegantly, he raised his hands, but his eyes stayed on Caleb.
"You think this ends with cuffs?"
Voss said as Laura moved in.
"You still don't know what happened."
Caleb stepped closer, Titan panting beside him, blood from the bitten glove darkening his muzzle. Laura snapped the cuffs onto Voss's wrists. Voss leaned toward Caleb just enough for the words to cut through the storm.
"Marcus didn't die in the explosion," he said. "He died because he knew too much."
Caleb did not move. Not when the deputies dragged Voss toward the door. Not when Grace carried Noah into the stormlight. Not when Laura called for medical aid and sealed the warehouse as an active crime scene.
He only looked down when Titan pressed against his leg. Around the old dog's neck, beneath the fresh bandage, Caleb saw something half buried under dust near the open basement hatch. He crouched and picked it up. A collar. Cracked black leather. Military issue. Titan's original collar. The one Caleb had been told was recovered from the blast site 4 years ago. The lie had not just followed them home. It had been waiting under the floor. Victor Voss did not confess because he felt guilt. He confessed because the walls had finally moved too close. By sunrise, the storm over Frostwood had weakened into a quiet snowfall, soft and steady, as if the town itself was trying to cover what had been dragged out of the Black Pine warehouse. Police tape snapped in the wind around the old building. County trucks lined the access road. Evidence markers dotted the snow like small yellow flags planted over buried sins. Caleb Walker stood outside the warehouse with Titan beside him, both of them wrapped in the gray light of morning. The old German shepherd leaned against Caleb's leg, exhausted, one front paw bandaged from the fight, his bent ear tipped forward as deputies carried sealed boxes from the basement. Titan's eyes followed every movement, not with fear anymore, but with the tired attention of a soldier who had stayed awake too long. Inside the sheriff's office, Victor Voss sat under fluorescent lights with his wrists chained to the steel table. Voss was still polished, even in custody. His silver hair had been combed back with wet fingers, his black coat hung neatly on the chair behind him, and the scar across his chin seemed sharper under the pale light. But the cold arrogance in his eyes had cracked. Men like Voss could command silence only as long as everyone feared what would happen if they spoke. Now, Noah Reed was alive. The warehouse had been opened. Titan's old collar had been found beneath the floor. The dead evidence had started breathing. Sheriff Laura Bennett sat across from him with a recorder on the table.
Beside her stood Agent Daniel Mercer from the Federal Task Force, a tall black man in his early 50s with close-cut gray hair, a dark overcoat, and the patient, unreadable expression of someone who had listened to liars for most of his career. Mercer spoke rarely, but when he did, his questions landed with quiet weight. Caleb stood behind the glass in the observation room. He did not sit. Titan lay at his feet, head up, eyes fixed on Voss through the window. Voss looked at the dog once. That was when his face changed. Not fear exactly. Recognition. "You want the story?" Voss said finally, voice rough from a long night. "Fine. I'll give you the story." 4 years earlier, in Afghanistan, Victor Voss had not been a field hero. He had been a logistics commander, a man who controlled manifests, cargo routes, fuel schedules, equipment transfers, and the paperwork that decided what officially existed. That was where the money was. That was where the silence was. Weapons, encrypted radios, medical kits, drone parts, and tactical gear could disappear into war dust if the right people stamped the right forms. At first, Voss said, it had been 1 shipment, then 3, then a pipeline. Military equipment moved into black market hands, routed through shell contractors, burned-out depots, and stateside salvage businesses that looked too small to matter. Frostwood had been one of the quiet stops. Roy Haskins had been useful because nobody expected anything clean to come out of his junkyard. Marcus Hale had noticed. Caleb's hand tightened around the edge of the observation window when Marcus's name came up. In his memory, Marcus was still standing in desert sunlight with that easy grin, broad shoulders relaxed, dark eyes taking in everything. Marcus had been the kind of man who made danger feel manageable because he never wasted words on fear. He had read shipment codes the way other men read weather, and he had seen numbers that did not match. He was going to report it, Voss said. Not to me. Above me. Laura's face stayed calm. So you set the coordinates. Voss looked down. I adjusted the extraction route, gave them a hot path, and told command it was clean. I did not pull the trigger in that ambush. Caleb stepped closer to the glass. Voss swallowed. But I sent them there. The room went quiet except for the recorder. Marcus had not died because of confusion. He had not died because war was cruel and random. He had died because he had found the truth and trusted the wrong chain of command. And Titan? Laura asked. Voss's eyes flicked toward the glass again. The dog survived the blast, badly wounded but alive. He had tracked a crate transfer before the ambush. He knew the scent. He knew our people. Some handlers believe dogs don't remember like men do. Voss gave a bitter little smile. They're wrong. Titan rose slowly in the observation room, his old body trembling. Caleb put a hand on his back. Voss admitted they could not risk Titan returning to official channels. The dog was transported under false medical logs, moved stateside, and hidden through the same network. For a while, they used him, forced him to identify old cargo, scent-match military bags, locate buried equipment, prove which shipments came from which route. When Titan resisted, they beat him. When he aged, they chained him. When he became more burden than asset, Roy Haskins was paid to keep him behind the salvage shop until someone decided whether to kill him. Roy had chosen a cheaper option, a cardboard sign. For sale, $1. By noon, Roy Haskins was arrested outside his salvage shop. He did not look like the powerful man he had pretended to be. He looked like what he was, a frightened, bitter old coward in a stained brown coat, shouting that he had only kept the dog, only held some boxes, only made a little money. Deputies found veterinary supplies he had never used, blood-marked chains, payment envelopes, and messages connecting him to Voss's drivers. Roy's hands shook as Deputy Marisol Kane cuffed him. Marisol's black hair was tucked beneath her sheriff's beanie, and her face held no anger, only professional disgust.
"That dog was worth more than every dollar you ever touched," she said. Roy had no answer. The arrests continued through the week. Drivers, handlers, 2 shell company operators, and a retired contractor from Idaho were taken into custody. The Black Pine warehouse was sealed. Federal agents removed crates, ledgers, phones, uniforms, and files listing veterans who had been pressured, paid, or blackmailed into moving illegal cargo. Lena Reed learned what had happened to her husband, Peter. He had not abandoned them. He had tried to leave the operation after discovering what was inside the crates. Voss's men had beaten him, threatened his family, and forced him to drive one last route. After that, he vanished into the machinery of fear the way many desperate men did. The investigation would take time, but Lena finally had something stronger than rumors. She had the truth. Lena was not a dramatic woman. She was too tired for that. When Sheriff Laura told her what they had found, Lena sat in the small interview room with Noah's hand inside both of hers and cried without making a sound. She was 32, thin from long shifts and worry, but in that moment something lifted from her face. Not grief. Grief stayed. But the shame people had placed on her for being left behind began to loosen. Noah sat beside her, wrapped in a donated winter coat, his sandy hair combed flat by Grace's careful hands. He did not speak much, but when Titan limped into the room, Noah slid from his chair and hugged the dog around the neck. Titan stood still and let him. Grace Miller stood near the doorway watching them. Her eyes were red from too little sleep, but her posture was steady. She had spent years teaching children to name colors, count coins, and write sentences. Now she understood some children needed something else first: permission to tell the truth. 2 weeks later, she opened a small support class in the library annex behind Frostwood Elementary. She called it the Brave Room, though the first sign was handwritten on blue construction paper because the official one had not arrived yet. Children came there after school to draw, write, talk, or simply sit quietly with cocoa in their hands. Pastor Ruth Calder donated blankets. Sheriff Laura arranged for a counselor to visit twice a week. Lena accepted a part-time position in the school library, shelving books and checking in students, so Noah would never again have to wait outside alone after dismissal. Principal Martin Pruitt apologized in private first, then in public after Grace told him private shame did not repair public silence. He looked smaller at the school board meeting, his silver hair combed too perfectly, his voice cracking as he admitted the school had dismissed warnings it should have protected. Grace did not humiliate him. She only made sure the children heard him say they had been believed too late. At the end of the month, Frostwood gathered in the town square. The snow had softened by then. Sunlight poured over the roofs and turned the white streets gold. Folding chairs had been set in rows near the flagpole. Children from Grace's class stood together, holding drawings of dogs, stars, cabins, and tall pine trees. Lena stood behind Noah with one hand on his shoulder. Sheriff Laura wore her formal uniform, dark and clean, her badge catching the light. Mayor Thomas Ellery took the small platform first. He was a round, soft-spoken man in his 60s with white hair, a wool overcoat, and the anxious kindness of someone who preferred ribbon cuttings to speeches about corruption. But that day his voice held. "This town failed to see what was hidden in front of us," he said. "Today, we honor the one who remembered." Caleb stood beside the platform in his old green military jacket, not a formal uniform. He had refused anything polished. Titan sat at his left side, thinner than he should have been, older than anyone wanted to admit, but clean now. His sable coat had been brushed, his bandages had been changed. Around his neck was the restored black leather collar found beneath the warehouse floor. Caleb knelt in front of him. For a moment, the crowd disappeared. It was just the two of them again. A man and the dog he had buried in his heart.
Sheriff Laura stepped forward and handed Caleb a small badge. It was simple, silver, and engraved with the words, Titan, Guardian Who Came Home. Caleb fastened it beside the old collar tag. Titan lifted his head. The crowd stood. No one cheered at first. They clapped softly, then harder, until the sound filled the square and rolled toward the pine slopes beyond town. Noah cried openly. Grace wiped her eyes. Lena held him close. Even Deputy Owen Price turned away for a second, pretending to check his radio.
Caleb placed his forehead gently against Titan's. "You brought him home," he whispered. "You brought all of us home." Later that evening, Noah gave Caleb a drawing. It showed Caleb, Grace, Noah, Lena, and Titan standing outside the cabin under a sky full of stars. The cabin windows glowed yellow, snow lay on the roof. Titan was drawn larger than everyone else, his bent ear pointed toward the moon. "It's not perfect," Noah said. Caleb studied it for a long time. "No," he said softly. "It's true." That winter, Frostwood created the Titan Fund to care for retired working dogs, police canines, and military service animals whose bodies had given more than anyone had the right to ask. The first donation came in a coffee can from Sarah Bell, the gruff diner owner at Millie's, a short woman with silver curls, strong arms, and a voice that could scare off a drunk customer from across the room. She claimed she didn't like dogs much, then left $300 and a bag of cooked chicken at Caleb's door. Caleb began turning the photographs back up. First Marcus, then Titan, then the three of them together in desert sun. He placed the frame on the mantel above the stone fireplace and did not look away. In the weeks that followed, Grace and Noah came by the cabin often. Sometimes Lena came too, bringing library books for Caleb because she had decided a man with that many field manuals needed at least one novel. Grace brought soup. Noah brought drawings. Titan accepted all of them like he had been expecting a family to arrive eventually and had simply waited long enough. Caleb was not healed all at once. Men like him rarely were. But he stopped living like a ghost, hiding from another ghost. He fixed the porch rail. He cleared the snow from both chairs instead of one. He let Grace sit beside him in the quiet without needing to explain the silence. He let Noah throw sticks for Titan, though the old dog mostly watched them land and gave Caleb a look that said, "Foolish child, retrieve it yourself." And on the last night of that long winter, snow began falling again outside the cabin window. Caleb sat by the fire with Titan asleep at his boots. The old German shepherd's breathing was slow and steady, his scarred body warm in the orange light. Above them, on the mantel, Marcus Hale's photograph stood upright at last. Caleb looked at it for a long time. Then he looked down at Titan. 4 years of lies had buried the truth under fire, paperwork, fear, and snow. But a $1 dog had come home. He had saved a child. He had exposed a betrayal. He had returned a dead man's honor. And in the quiet cabin at Black Pine Ridge, with Grace's laughter faint in the kitchen and Noah's newest drawing drying on the table, Caleb Walker finally understood something he had not believed in years. Sometimes, God does not send hope loudly. Sometimes he sends it limping through the snow with a bent ear, tired eyes, and a heart that still remembers the way home. You know what gets me most about Titan's story? It wasn't just the cardboard sign, the falling snow, or the sight of a wounded German shepherd being sold for $1 like his life no longer mattered. It was the moment Caleb realized Titan had never truly stopped serving. Even after 4 years of pain, chains, hunger, and silence, that old canine still remembered the truth no one else was brave enough to say. Most people saw a broken dog. Roy saw a burden. Voss saw a mistake that should have stayed buried. But Caleb saw his partner. Noah saw a guardian. And maybe that was what God wanted Frostwood to see. Sometimes the ones the world throws away are carrying the very miracle that can save everyone else. Because Titan came home, Noah lived.
Marcus's name was cleared. Grace found the courage to protect children who had been forced into silence. Lena learned her husband had not simply abandoned them.
And Caleb, a man who had been living like a ghost, finally remembered that love can return, even after grief tells you it is gone forever. Tonight, I pray God blesses you, protects your family, heals the wounds you never speak about, and gives you the eyes to recognize hope when it comes limping through the snow. If Titan's story touched your heart, write Amen in the comments. And if you believe in loyalty, courage, faith, and second chances, subscribe and stay with us. But Titan's story was not the last time a forgotten canine carried the truth back from the edge of death. Wait until I tell you about the retired Marine who found a starving police dog locked inside an abandoned cruiser during a midnight storm. That story begins with a burned evidence box, a missing handler, and a German Shepherd who refused to leave one frozen roadside until the secret hidden inside that wreck was finally exposed. And trust me, when that Marine opened the back door and saw what the dog was guarding, even the sheriff could not speak. Subscribe now because this next story is one you definitely do not want to miss.